Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to the session on AI, health application in AI in the real world. My name is Hitesh Thakra, and I'll be your moderator for this session. We've got a great panel who will discuss various areas around health in AI, from the investment side, from the technology side, and some of the challenges around what we call closing the loop. My background, I'm a board member at the Alan Turing Institute, and I'm also on the commercial board. I'm involved in life sciences through my role as a partner at Syncona, which is a cell and gene therapy life science fund. And I'm also involved with the KQ Accelerator, which is the health and data accelerator for early stage companies in the sector. And I also chair an investment fund in deep tech companies. So our first session is going to be with Peter Kachmeti, who's going to come and talk to you about his product, KerenMed, which is an approved AI algorithm for breast cancer. We'll talk for 10, 12 minutes. We've got the opportunity to ask questions. And after the session, I'll get the individual members of the panel to introduce themselves, and then we'll go into some good discussion, I hope. So feel free to ask questions whenever you're ready. Peter, are you ready to come in?
Yes, absolutely.
Welcome to Peter.
Thank you. And I appreciate the opportunity and welcome everyone. I'm the CEO and one of the two co-founders of Chiron Medical. So if you hear extreme enthusiasm in my voice about some of the stuff that I will present, that might be the reason. I'm going to be talking about our approach in Chiron for safe AI specifically for healthcare, and our flagship product, which is MIA, Mammography Intelligent Assessment, which is really aimed at assessing breast cancer in breast cancer screening programs, really supporting the breast cancer screening workflow. What I will focus on today at a really high level is our quest for generalizability. That is what we believe is the most important part in order to get AI. But feel free to ask any questions later. So just a high level about the approach of Chiron. We believe that AI is extremely important for cancer diagnostics, because cancer diagnostics is very much dependent on information, and most importantly, lack of information throughout the patient pathway. We're focused on breast cancer screening, and what we believe is the most important is how we are developing AI, how we are assessing AI, and how we're bringing AI really to the everyday work and the everyday workflow of clinical practice. And on that, we believe that everything should be practical, really robust evidence to be given. We need to support the system rather than going against the system. This means support rather than disruption where is possible, and safety is above all. Bit more on our approach and what we believe in the position and the best place for AI is complementing human capability. So humans have the capability of processing information from images, for instance, medical images can be sort of depicted in a Venn diagram. You can have what kind of inputs can human radiologist and a human visual system process, and what can AI process. Usually there's an overlap, and overlap means redundancy. It's great, but what is really exciting is that AI can process information and images and generally medical data that the human brain, the human visual system cannot. Bringing that extra to the human capability is really where we can have the best possible outcome. Now, just to say why we're working with breast cancer is because there are a lot of important challenges, shortage of radiologists who know this specialty, obviously some variable performance in doing this extremely complicated task, and also patient impact. All of those are sort of ramping up. The needs and the requirements are going up, while sort of like the resources and the available support is going down over time. And what is extremely important is that under COVID, breast cancer and screening has been stopped mostly. This basically means that over 1 million patients have not been cancers may not have been, over 1 million patients have not been assessed. As we can estimate roughly 1,100 cases of cancer potentially not detected in the last year. This is extremely important to fix because early detection is very important for cancer care. Breast cancer is very, very easy to treat when it's early detected. Currently, we're working across the globe with multiple different partners. This is important for generalizability. Generalizability is really, really the key for achieving safe AI. So after that very quick run through, we'll do a high-level intro of what MIA does, our software. Very basically gets 4 images, the 4 standard images that you do in breast cancer screening. And based on those four images, it does a very simple binary recall decision. Should a patient come back from screening for further assessment or not? Very, very simple. In principle, actually relatively complicated to prove in practice for practical performance. Just for those of you who may not know the background of breast cancer screening, the standard of care is what you see on the top. This is called double reading. Double reading means 2 radiologists look at every single case, and then if they agree, a decision is already made. If they don't agree, an arbitration happens. Arbitration means a third person or a group of radiologists decide whether the patient should be recalled or not. Now, this is an extremely good starting point for AI to come into healthcare. And the reason for that is you can bring in AI instead of one of the radiologists. This serves the purpose of saving a lot of workload, very important in a field where there's a very extreme shortage of available expertise. Also, it is one of the ways, because the 2 readers are usually independent, this is very, very seamless fit into the workflow and very little biasing of the radiologist, which is a very important task in order to have the optimal collaboration between AI and humans. When we do this, basically coming back to our principle, human versus human plus radiologist, what you see here is sort of the capability of 2 humans is very much overlapping, high redundancy, but the extent of understanding information from the image is not necessarily extended too much. In the case of AI, again, some redundancy, but very much extended capability on getting information from images. This is what you see here is a bit of an example of what kind of problems there might occur in a practical setting. What you see on the left side is a case with a really large mass. You may see here the software with the outline understands that something is missing there, and I think us humans can definitely see that there's something wrong. The problem is that humans can be very much trigger happy and just say, yeah, there's a positive case there, and they potentially not see the other side of very, very subtle and very hard to detect signals. What you can have in this case is mastectomy, chemotherapy, radiotherapy, get the patient through a lot of pain, and the cancer is still potentially growing relatively unchecked on the other side. This is one of the areas where AI can really help. Another area is where just the detection is extremely hard. And what you see here is what we call in breast cancer screening an architectural distortion. As the radiologist explained, it's a slightly different spider-like motif compared to what the other spider-like motifs on all over the image. And they say this is a signal, a subtle signal of cancer. It's important to know that the big white dots and some of the other more obvious features are not signs of cancer. That's normal. That subtle signal is the sign of cancer. When AI is trained well and is safe, what it can really do is bring consistent detection of these hard cases that might otherwise be missed by potentially junior radiologists, etc. Going on from the introduction of our software, I will say, of course, the previous 2 cases were handpicked cases for showing you some interesting results. What really matters is to proving AI in terms of numbers. So we did it in 2 studies so far. Our first study was in 2018, 4 sites, and with over 3,000 cases. we have seen that our software can perform better than how radiologists are expected to perform. So radiologists are sort of like in the green circle, and then purple is where our software's performance was, and best performance is towards the top left. So we were really excited about that, but and this was quite a bit larger scale than what we have seen previously in AI assessment, but we were very sure this is not the end, and this is not how AI should actually be assessed in practice. Nevertheless, the performance differences compared to expected performance was quite a bit above. But then we took on from sort of the vanity successes that we had, we went on to really assess how AI works. And this is the key that I would like everyone to take away today. Assessing AI, especially as a black box, takes actually quite a bit of effort, a magnitude larger effort than just doing studies that are previously done. And I believe actually the methodology is not 100% developed yet in order for us to do this extremely well. And what we did in 2020, so sort of end of last year, is conclude a really large study with 250,000 cases with over 180,000 women. This is more than what the number of screens that you get in some countries. This was over 10 years though, 7 sites, 2 countries, very different demographics, very different screening systems, high diversity of really representative data. We did paired comparisons of assessing our software against standard of care. We assessed the software on its own versus a single reader 1, that's what you see on the left. And we also simulated what double reading would be with our software and compared that to the historical standard of care. This was a simulation because we did a retrospective study. The retrospective study is the only way to get to the kind of sizes that we really require. Truthing was very important. We're not comparing to radiologists. We were comparing against biopsy, proof for positives, or longitudinal negatives for negatives. Reliable truthing is extremely important, but truthing always introduces to some degree a bias. So we also made sure that we used metrics that were as unbiased as possible. So in the practice of breast cancer screening, this meant recall rate, which means no truthing required. But of course, we used some of the more standard metrics, sensitivity and specificity as well. Beyond, and very, very important, in the past, and especially in regulatory terms, area under the curve and holistic assessment is usually used. That is very rarely meaningful in practice. It's very important that we understand what the software would work in practice, in practical settings. We assess generalizability across various different input variability, hardware vendors, so imaging devices, services, demographics, and of course, a large study and a varied study is extremely important for that. We did subgroup analysis on cancer subtypes. This is very important to assess the downstream impact of cancer detection. If with the software we would have a different distribution of cancers detected than without, then we need to have utility analysis. That's a very different undertaking than just saying we perform well. So the standalone results when the software is compared with a single radiologist were very positive in terms of the AI at the operating points that we did. The AI performed superior in sensitivity and non-inferior in specificity. Roughly, we can expect a 5% improvement in sensitivity and 5% drop in specificity. But it's very important to know that actually in the case of breast cancer screening, the standalone results is not what matters, but how we interact and how we work really in a double reading setting. So in a double reading setting, we also have done multiple analyses. Pretty much every single metric that we had, a practical metric, we had superiority or non-inferiority proven. And what really matters here is important that this is despite the simulation and despite missing data on historical false negatives. That's very important to note. But really on this large and really diverse data for every sort of like subpart for us to maintain non-inferiority and superiority is really what we mean by proving the safety of AI. We have looked at the spectrum of disease, the spectrum of cancers, and what is extremely exciting here is that it's less than 0.7% difference between historical and our actual. So with the historical double reading and with double reading with AI, so we're very, very confident that we're maintaining the standard of care in terms of downstream impact. So I would just give a quick shout out. This was a preliminary work that we did before an important project started for us. This important project is the UK government's AI award project. We're intending to replicate the results and further assess generalizability and do studies beyond retrospective studies in order to really improve where we are. And so key takeaways from me is breast cancer needs support, screening needs support. It's very important and needs a lot of our attention. AI can help, but only when it's safe. And safety of AI needs to be assessed thoroughly with large-scale studies, high input variance, practical metrics, really direct comparison to standard of care, and assessing workflow and downstream effects.
Thank you, Peter. Can we do the panel again? Thank you, Peter, for that really interesting update. So I've got a question first, and then we'll go on to the panel. If models are trained on the radiologist's previous assessments, how do you confront potential bias in the data or cases where I guess it's mislabeling of data? How do you kind of handle that?
So the important thing is comparison is to be done to the standard of care, which is going to be single reading or assemble of radiologists. But actually the true thing, the reference to compare against, has to be longitudinal follow-up, so biopsy proof and negative follow-up. So we're never going to have full access to the truth. There's always going to be missing data, and even the biopsies can be inaccurate, but that is the perceived truth, and it's much more accurate than what we would get from screening radiology.
Thank you. So I'm going to now introduce our panel, and then we'll carry on with this discussion for a few moments. But if I can just go around, Shivani first, if you can just say a few words about yourself and what you do, and then Vishal after Shivani. Go ahead, Shivani.
Yep, I'm the CEO and founder of BrightLobe, and we've developed proprietary technology that can both assess and support neurodevelopment in children.
Okay.
My name is Vishal Gulati. I'm an investor. I invest in data-driven health companies. I've invested in about 20 companies. I invest out of Draper Esprit or Oxford Science Innovations in Oxford, and I'm also an angel investor. And I also work alongside Hitesh at KQ Labs. And it is good to see Shivani from our cohort. And I'm also an investor in Chiron. So welcome, Peter.
Thank you. Vishal, Harpreet, please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Hitesh. My name is Harpreet Sood. I'm a primary care physician, GP in London. Also sit on the board of Health Education England, which is responsible for the training and development of the workforce across the NHS. Formerly, I was the Associate Chief Clinical Information Officer at NHS England, where a lot of my responsibilities were around bringing the clinical insights into our informatics, data, and digital health programs. As a primary care physician, a lot of my interest aligns with looking at the role of technology and AI and how we change practice. And I'm hoping to share some of my insights and lessons in what this means for the UK.
Let's start with you, Harpreet, on this question about closing the loop, and then I'll ask Shivani to follow. You know, the big issue has been around how do you get clinicians to adopt new technologies? How do you get the regulation to match that? And how do you get reimbursement, particularly in the US? What's been your experience around your particularly in the UK market, Harpreet?
Absolutely, Hitesh. I guess, you know, for me, there's kind of 5 key elements to this, and I'll touch upon each of those. And first and foremost, I think it congratulates Peter and the team because, you know, presentation like this are hugely valuable when they highlight in a much more clearer way of what they're trying to do. And I guess that leads me on to my first point is that, you know, through my previous work and still with my current work, there's a lot of issues around claims versus reality, right? So first and foremost, I think we have to be clear on, and it's obviously to say this, but I think it's hugely relevant, what problem you're trying to solve, but then being true and transparent to the claims versus what the reality is. And that can be played out in many ways, and hopefully we can discuss that as we go in the panel. The second is around looking at the evidence and the outcomes. And I think, I've seen technology entrepreneurs, investors who tend to shy away from things like that because it requires a lot of heavy lifting. But ultimately, if you are trying to change practice, or you're trying to bring a new way of working, or you're trying to bring potentially a more superior way of delivering care, then you still need to justify that through actually highlighting, does this improve the standard of care? And that evidence element is really critical, ensuring that the science and rigor is part of it, which then links to the standards piece, ensuring standards are there. And NHS AI Lab with others are doing some great work on that in terms of really highlighting, what are some of the standards and the code of practice that we expect. So if you are using data for a certain aspect of things, you are using it for that purpose and not for anything else. How are you thinking about your value proposition? How are you thinking about the transparency element? And I think that all plays into it.
Okay. Maybe Shivani could come in and just address your business is very different. It's around mental health, and perhaps you can just talk about some of the challenges you face, which are very different from an image world.
Well, to clarify, our focus is on neurodevelopment, and one of our sort of sub-focuses is on mental health. But from the perspective of an early stage startup like ours, which focuses on digital health, one of our biggest challenges has been to contend with regulation, essentially, of technologies like ours. So we've been really closely following FDA developments on this, specifically with regard to the semi-recent release of the Digital Health Innovation Action Plan, for example, which was an attempt by that particular agency to lay out the specific criteria by which they could advance safe and effective digital health technologies. And in addition to that, one thing I found that was quite interesting was that the FDA actually ran something called, I think it was something like the Digital Health Pre-Certification Pilot Program, which sort of sets a precedent, because what they did there was they involved a number of early stage startups in helping them set particular KPIs and metrics by which they could then determine how they would regulate digital health therapeutics as well as diagnostic tools moving forward. So I think there is something in that potentially as a prescription for how other agencies could potentially handle it. I think the other question for us was, obviously, as with all startups, is how do you achieve that FDA approval, especially with regard to something like software? And what's really tricky about it is that, yes, you can carve out a clear project roadmap for what approval could look like. So what steps you would need to take towards pre-market notification or pre-market approval. But for software, does that then mean that for every iteration, you would then need to have it reapproved? And so these are sort of discussions that have gone back and forth. Obviously, the answer is no. But these sort of questions have come up in the past, and it sort of serves to add fodder to sort of this larger conversation about how will this be regulated in the future. And then finally, I think it was touched upon before, there's an inherent so-called black box nature to AI. And for us, one thing that has been challenging, particularly where clinicians are concerned, but also on sort of the direct-to-consumer patient side, is consumer literacy. So how do you directly engage with patient advocacy groups to help them understand that this technology is empowering? And also, how do you speak to clinicians to ensure that that the language we're using is very clear? So to Harpreet's earlier point about making claims, I think this is where this comes in. We're very clear, for example, about using the phrase AI-assisted diagnostics or AI-assisted therapeutics, because we don't want to overstate or exaggerate what our technology is capable of. And I think that's quite important as well.
Peter, you're more further ahead than any of us probably we know in the UK, in that you've got some approval on from the CE mark. What's been the lesson you've learned around getting regulatory support for MIA?
Actually, regulatory support is a field to learn into, and it's a field that I think is always a few steps behind, is just by the nature of innovation. We're trying to innovate at the forefront, and it's a clear case of trying to prepare for the battles of the past, I think is basically what regulation sounds like. What I'm quite excited about is that in Europe, while the medical device regulations are actually a bit more strict than in the FDA, most people might not see that, but that's actually the case, and more rigorous. There's actually quite a bit of freedom to go for claims and to really be innovative, which is a great benefit in Europe. What I find as the harder barrier is more of the public nature of healthcare in Europe means that the guidelines and the professional guidelines are a bit more strict and quite hard to move and go with. So I would say the real barrier in Europe, even though the regulation is a bit harder than in the US, is more around guidelines and policy, and especially for breast cancer screening where we work, that's extremely standardized. So bringing a tiny bit of change into something very standardized and very sort of ingrained with lots of the inertia is I think the key element, and that's where I think a lot of discussion between industry, academia, and the clinicians is really important. Thankfully, the European
I can bring Vishal in, because as an investor, you're also interested in the commercial aspects of these technologies. Could you say a few words about how you think about reimbursement and how ultimately an investor makes a return on where you still got regulatory wood to chop?
Yeah, so thanks very much, Hitesh. Very good to hear people's comments and also to see, Mia, how far it has come. So I think that there are regulatory challenges that companies have to face. And what seems to have happened just in the last few years that I've been watching this field, regulation has become more predictable. It's one thing to say easy or hard is a different scale, but predictable and unpredictable is a slightly different scale. So it remains hard because you have to do things in a certain way to get there, but it is more predictable now. So, for example, one of my portfolio companies just got an FDA approval for a direct-to-consumer diagnostic, and they were able to have very clear guidelines from the FDA that their unregulated part of their app, so this app does many different things, and only one part of it has the FDA approval. They have very clear guidelines of what they can do to the unregulated part without having to go for any further regulatory approval, and what bar they have set. And I like that, because as a company now you know where you stand. You're not constantly looking over your shoulder that if we move this button from left to right, do we have to go to the FDA? So I think that predictability really helps investors, because we then know that actually this is how they will look at it.
Okay, can I just change the subject now to talk about sticking with Vishal for the moment, in terms of investment in the sector? And if I think about data and healthcare, it's kind of converged in the last 4 or 5 years. But the first people who moved on this were the tech companies, and people know about IBM Watson, Google. They hired a lot of life science people. And it's fair to say that first gen of capital, really, most of it was not wasted, but it didn't go to where it was meant to go into developing the market. Vishal, what are your thoughts on that? What did the tech companies, what were they trying to do and have not been successful at? And how has it changed their thinking on the second wave of investing they're making?
So I think that in the examples that you have mentioned, some of the tech companies that jumped in, they kind of completely missed the whole productization piece. So they were very keen to demonstrate the skills that they had, that IBM Watson can do X and IBM Watson can go on Jeopardy, or Google DeepMind can do this, or they can do that. But I think that there is that is just the beginning. Yeah. So it is not the end. It is actually the journey is much further ahead. And that journey, unfortunately or fortunately, is less exciting, is less PR friendly. You can't get on the cover of Wired magazine to say that you have really nailed the relevance for a particular pair system, because that's what you really have to do in order to sell a product. So that, I think, was a big challenge that some of the companies faced. And I think that, from tracking Peter's journey, I remember the first time when we talked about Chiron, I thought our biggest challenge would be to get images. And then when we started to do good work, people were throwing images at us. We could have as many images as we wanted. So every 6 months, there is a new challenge in this journey. And now most recently generalizability, because 1 year ago, we were talking of significance. It's just a moving thing. And I think small companies being nimble can actually do that a little bit better, I think.
That's great. Anyone else want to come in on the tech capital? Harpreet, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think just linked on that, and this is not necessarily on the tech capital, but it's relevant, is that, health systems have also responded to this, right? If I can go back a bit and look at the US in the terms of the investments they did with the High Tech Act post 2008, the billions of dollars that went into healthcare IT, the same way we've done in the UK, where we've poured, again, billions of pounds into electronic health records. It's a really important signal that we are giving to the market, or the government's giving to the market, the NHS is giving to the market, to show that we are keen on developing this ecosystem. And I think that also needs to take in consideration. But what you can't do is rely on government or the NHS to do all the heavy lifting. We have to do it in an ecosystem play. And I'm hoping that as we move forward, more and more of this will come, and we'll see some really good end-to-end solutions that are actually being used rather than just, like Vishal said, developed and then kind of trickle off.
Great. Change the subject to move on to data fairness and data accuracy. I mean, one of the lessons we learned from the random controlled gold standard for drug development is that there are biases. There are biases towards the way our genetics work. Some drugs work different in different people. And that's a structure of the clinical trial world. My question really to the panel is that in the data science world, are we at the risk of replicating some of those mistakes, either by having narrow data sets or having data sets which are biased towards some ethnicity or gender or some narrow groups geographically? And what is it that we could do to overcome those challenges which we didn't really do properly in the RCT days? Who would like to kick off on that?
So, well, I think Peter might be good at that.
Yes, that's exactly the stage where we are, and I just go back. I think patient safety is the key for that. Safe AI is the key for that. Generalizability is what we need to do, and really, generalizability means no systematic performance drop for any sort of detectable and identifiable part of the population. So there's no systematic performance drop. So it means for some ethnicity, for some group, some geography, we're not bringing the AI in will not drop standard of care below what it would be without.
Have you had to create synthetic data to match population matches and things like that?
Absolutely. I think the trick with that is we never know with a black box and in a particular field where really the confounding factors are. So it's basically data mining, but not mining for the value, mining for the problems, and mining for the things that could be an issue. That kind of confounding factor hunting is what I believe is extremely important, and it's the last stage of AI development that I think most companies across the globe have not actually tackled yet. It's some investors call it the long tail of the input problem. The very varied and rare inputs we still need to perform well.
Harpreet, did you have a comment?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to pick up on that point, but also talk about the data that we have at source, right? If we look at again what's come out in the last 12 months, it's been quite clear COVID has impacted certain ethnicities over others. But one of the key things that's also come out of it is that we simply don't know enough about people from different ethnicities and backgrounds in terms of their health and their population, nor do we collect data in a very effective way. And I think that's certainly been the case in the UK, and I'm sure that's applicable in the US as well. And we need to be more mindful of that and ensure that those people from different ethnicities and backgrounds are coming forward for trials and helping to share their data so that we can do exactly like Peter said, develop solutions that are applicable.
Rani, how have you dealt with this issue in your company?
One thing that we're looking at is investigating open source tools. So tools that developers can actually use to detect bias and mitigate bias. And so I've been quite encouraged by that. There's AI Fairness 360, there's IBM OpenScale, and obviously these tools are imperfect, but they are important steps forward. I think also if you consider, the crux of this problem really comes from one of two sources. It comes from potentially a developer unknowingly introducing bias into a model, or it can come from the representative data set being incomplete or just not representative, as we've already discussed, of the entire population. And in terms of what we can do to mitigate that, I think it's about really knowing clearly where AI could potentially exacerbate bias and where it can actually correct bias, because it can do both. It's context dependent. And secondly, it goes without saying, diversification of the workforce in terms of who's actually developing these models. And I think those two together would represent a pretty great leap forward in improving detection and mitigation of bias.
We have a question from the audience. So I did unrelate different aspect. Where should liability for misdiagnosis in AI-assisted diagnosis lie?
It should lie with the person who profits from providing that software.
So, and you're basically suing the programmer, effectively.
Well, I think that any company that is going to provide any kind of a service, they have to be able to say that it is reliable and trustworthy. And the only way to say that you really stand behind your product is to take the liability for it going wrong. Within the framework in which it is used, and how it is used correctly, if it is deployed correctly, and it is all those caveats being there. But I would find it really hard to put that ethically or morally in the hands of anybody else.
Do you think the insurance world is going to have a challenge around that?
Well, I think the insurance world will have challenge around that. I think that there will be. So I think when Peter's product is in different countries, Peter will have to buy product liability insurance like every other company does for their products. What the challenge for insurers will be that how good are they at assessing the risk of Peter's product, which he has built, and do they have the skills to be able to fairly price it, because they could price it too low or too high. So I think that is where the challenge for insurers is going to be. But overall, their liability will probably go down if these products are more accurate and they're better than the ones before.
Yeah.
Do we think, Harpreet, you want to come in here?
No, I think it's really important on that point, because speaking as a clinician, I would find it very difficult to use something, not only in terms of the knowledge, but also the fact that I'm not guaranteed that the company that's produced this is not taking on the responsibility. I mean, to use that for my clinical setting for my patients, it's just not going to work, right? Whereas if there is that guarantee, like Vishal has highlighted, where they stand behind their product and say, this is... Yeah.
I can see that insurance companies' product liability on the kettle is different from product liability on guaranteeing somebody's not cured of cancer and they're not. So I can see some big fundamental challenges for
I think, Hitesh, that's right. I think there will be liability will be at different levels. So there will be, clinician will make a choice. One clinician may choose product A, another clinician might choose product B. Yeah. Then there will be about the infrastructure within the system they work in. If the images that are being collected in case of mammograms, they are not being collected on high quality equipment, and those images are not of good quality, then Peter's algorithm can't do the job that it needs to do. So I think that it will end up, we'll have to think a lot about this, but I think it's a surmountable problem.
Yeah.
I agree. And could I also just say that I think this is why liaising directly with physician certification bodies is profoundly important to formalize the use cases of your technology. So I think that's an important point to make, just because that obviously would govern exactly how clinicians intend to use that technology, and that can be arbitrated to an extent, actually fully by the person who's providing the technology, where you can specify over time as that technology evolves exactly when and where and in what instances it ought to be used.
Yeah, I think intended use is extremely important, and just would like to say, like, AI works as like a very sophisticated calculator. So need to have a piece of thinking about, do we want you to have, if it works as a calculator, as a supportive tool, do you want to have more liability that you want to give to a calculator or not? Like, I think that's important. But this is already a regulated industry, right? So the regulations already say what the companies are reliable for as a baseline, but dependent on how active the piece of software is, so how further we go away from the normal medical device regulations, I think then the question becomes more and more interesting of like, okay, you're more towards medical device or more towards sort of workforce.
I mean, I guess the challenge in the US is this kind of over insurance and liability, clinician liability. So you might end up having more tests despite the AI saying it just to cover yourselves in the same way. The question from the audience here, does the black box nature come mostly from the of not understanding what AI is doing internally, or the lack of tools used to explain the models once they've been built? So it's an interesting question about, is it lack of understanding of what it's doing inside and the software is doing the work, or actually is it explaining out? Who'd like to, Peter?
I'll have a short note on that. We have some understanding of how the AI works. And it's very similar to how much understanding we have about some pharmaceutical drugs. We have a rough idea how they work, but really what kind of impact they have and exactly for the different varied patients, what they will do, that we don't exactly know. That's the black box on, again, sort of in the how it interacts with the variants. And so it's pretty much the same thing. We have some understanding, but not full understanding, that mostly comes from the complexity of biology. And somewhat from the AI.
You do feel that we'll never get to that in the same way you can through biology 100%, have drug mechanisms, we never understand it really.
I believe we can potentially get there. With AI, algorithms will be more and more explainable and more analyzable, and the methodology of analyzing semi-black box or black box algorithms getting relatively standardized and well understood. But when we're doing something very new, it's going to work differently. We need to figure out how to assess that. That's going to be a continuous problem.
Good. I'm going to move on to investors' questions now, and one for Vishal. I mean, we started a few years ago in this industry with kind of consumer apps and more the worried well downloading apps, and slowly we've moved into live longer and people like chronic conditions. And then we've now seen a lot of money go into drug discovery for AI. What have you seen in terms of where capital's gone, and whether we're overcapitalizing some sectors or undercapitalizing others? Just your thoughts on where the appetite today is.
So I think that there is a context that we should think about. So first of all, we have to accept that there is a lot more money in the market now than there used to be, and there are macro factors related to that. Not all of that is because of AI or because of companies making these AI tools. What has happened is that money will find a way to where they believe there is maximum opportunity and hope. That's how money flows. And Hitesh, you as a macroeconomist, you know that much better than anybody else. So the first factor, of course, is that there is a lot of money that is looking for long-term deployment. So there are more people in the market now that are able to wait for long-term for their capital to show return. And as a result, they're looking for those things that will have a dramatic effect over a period of time. And AI happens to be one of those technologies where they can see that if they deploy some of this capital, they can build new and defensible barriers which will be useful for next 20, 30, 50 years. So, we like internet, when first internet came in, people who deployed money in that and got into the things like Amazon and Google and other things, they were able to build 20, 30 years of dominance. Yeah. So now the new challenge of those is, so in the pharma industry, we can imagine that data is going to disrupt some of the existing big companies. So now one of the theses that the market has is that some of those disruptors will be using data more efficiently than, say, Pfizer uses it today. So they are looking for the next Pfizer, which will be the data-driven Pfizer. And they might think that it is Recursion. They might think it's in vitro. Those are the companies that they have decided that they will back with that money. So I think to that extent, if you are able to look at it within the context of two things: one, availability of capital that can be deployed for long term, and two, the promise of technology of AI, I think it seems like a very rational outcome. It does not seem irrational to me at all.
Okay. Anyone else want to come in on that? I guess the question is, when capital, as Vishal points out, is excess, we might end up misallocating. So the internet first wave, actually, yes, only a few survived. And my question would be is, are we at a stage where there's the maturity of the industry, which was some of the things we talked about around closing the loop and clinician insurance, is not ready to absorb the capital? So then you get a step down before you get the proper cycle coming through. And that probably, we're not sure about that yet, in my view. Go ahead, Vishal.
Can I say one more thing? I think that just in general, the overall startup activity is much, much bigger than what it used to be. So if you look at just the number of places where startups are coming from, there are billion-dollar companies coming from Romania. There are billion-dollar companies coming from Turkey. There are multiple billion-dollar companies coming from India. So you have to look at the global enterprise out there and look at what the total scale of startup activity is, and then look at the amount of money being poured in. You may not find that the demand and supply has changed that much. I think demand has grown in the same scale as supply.
Yeah, can I just wanted to come on that, and I think it's really great to hear Vishal talk about the longer term capital, which I think is fundamentally important, in particular for healthcare. But I think we also need to be clear on what aspect of the healthcare system we're looking at, right? So obviously, the pharma industry is one thing, the consumer industry in healthcare is another, but the health systems itself, it becomes even more difficult and complex. And the reason for that is, you know, if we take the NHS as an example, a semi-integrated healthcare system, you know, 100% tax funded pretty much, you know, a lot of that money is already allocated to day-to-day activities. So the margins for, you know, innovation, or how much will go towards new solutions, innovations, become limited. And I think investors need to be aware of that. So where you are positioning and where the money's going is critically important from a business perspective, because otherwise what happens is you destabilize health systems and you end up having a weak foundation for future innovation and future opportunities.
I think you're right, Harpreet. I think that we have a particular structure in the UK where parent provider is one.
Yeah.
Almost. You know, it is hard for outsiders to see any difference. And as a result, you are always competing with something that's already in there, and it's a cost center. And I think that poses a very specific challenge in the UK. You're right.
I have a question for Harpreet, and this is really the COVID question, in what has really changed GP practice, for example, in terms of virtual consultations. What end practice do you see after, once we stabilize to some degree, to your role as a GP physician practitioner? What are the major changes you think you'll see going on a 3 to 5 year view or a 1 to 3 year view?
Yeah, absolutely. And Hitesh, if I may, I wouldn't want to necessarily focus on a particular solution or product. I think the biggest thing for me has been the behavior change element of things, right? Two aspects of that. One is technology acceptance and the fact that technology can play a role, and then the perceived usefulness of what this technology is doing. So if I look at now, you know, my more experienced colleague, they are more than willing to exchange with these communication platforms that we have, or are willing to exchange with the fact that they could happily do a video consultation or even more telephone. And that conversation, like 14 months ago, would have been very difficult. So the fact that we are now thinking about that, I think, is a really important change.
And that's structural, do you think? That's
structural behavior, because I don't think, you know, we're not sort of solutions in this ecosystem, right? There's plenty of good innovative solutions, but it's more about now the appetite and the behaviors of individuals who are willing to accept that and then actually spend some time adopting it. And I hope we sustains moving forward. And then coupled with that, we will look at the reimbursement element of it and how we can then build a more sustainable footing, which I think will be the game changer.
Now, I'm going to ask all of you a last question where you can hopefully get time to think about it, is, you know, data science, machine learning has its foundations in maths and statistics, and true AI really has its foundations in neuroscience and human behavior. My question to all of you is, when do we think, if ever, the health sector in AI will become true AI. The vision IBM sold, marketing vision, was that all these data lakes will come in and the machine will tell you what's wrong with you and give you the right pill, etc. That was obviously, and they acquired 4 billion worth of data lakes effectively, which didn't go anywhere. But do we think we are multi-years away or a few years away into this kind of world of true AI impacting the health sector? Who would like to kick off on that thought?
So at its base level, Hitesh, I don't think we are more than 5 years away. So I can completely imagine something like, Genomics PLC, which does polygenic risk scores, then the other companies that are able to look at more phenotype data, and Peter's screening program could already have a learning loop where people would get called for their screening not by age, but by how their risk is stratifying. So I think that if any place in the world this will happen, it will probably happen in the UK or probably in Israel, given the integrated nature of health records. So I think that in terms of, so I don't see that as a global big bang change. I see that as a slowly emerging change with different islands of opportunity.
Vishal, is that driven by data learning, machine learning, i.e. that's data analytics rather than true AI?
I think that what I described probably is closer to Bayesian rather than machine learning. But I will leave it to my better qualified colleagues to comment on that distinction.
Okay, Shivani, would you like to come in then, Peter?
Yeah, I would echo Vishal's sentiments on that. I mean, as you said, the concept of true AI is still a contentious one. And for that reason, I remain slightly skeptical that we could achieve that in 5 years. So arbitrarily, I would say maybe I would double that, 10 to 15 years is what I would think.
Okay, Peter, you're living.
I can go with the trend of increasing the numbers. If we're thinking about general AI as true AI really,
no.
That's a
I think we are not. I think true general AI. I don't think that's what Hitesh is asking. Is that what you're asking, Hitesh? Oh my God, no. Okay.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about true AI, where the vision of a neuroscience led.
Okay, then for the record, I'm incredibly skeptical. So
I'm moving away from my original prediction.
I echo that sentiment.
They brought you back in 5 years' time.
I'm glad I'm going last because I think the important point though I would like to make is that it's I often find that we think about these challenges through the technology lens. I would be more interested in looking at the challenges that we have in terms of whether it's screening, diagnostic, and look at the problems we're trying to solve. And the example Vishal gave is a great example because AI may help with that, but it may not help as much as some of the other technologies we're looking at. So I think we need to look at it from that lens, think about the use cases, and then think about where technology can help, rather than looking at it from the technology lens and then looking for a problem to solve.
So I can give a good follow up to that one, and that I think links back to what Vishal said. I think we have built healthcare really around how a single discipline is really able to cope with data, but really what AI can do is merge and combine multiple disciplines, and that probably has a much better chance than a single human brain or the current status of healthcare. So I think actually what is tech able to do plus what do we want to achieve, I think both are important, but really stepping outside of the confines of the current organization of healthcare to maximize the benefits of AI. I think that would be true value, truly valuable AI in a way, and I think that's where we will see it to be irreplaceable and sort of a necessity if we want to have sort of responsible healthcare for our patients.
Great. On that note, I'm going to say thank you to the panel. It's been really interesting, some great insights. I hope we continue to have these development discussions. And when I see all of the innovation, I've been involved in the innovation sector for 30 odd years now, And what I see today is probably the most exciting in terms of these conversions of these big multi-sectors, which is driving new business models. And we didn't even talk about quantum computing. So there's probably another whole session on that aspect of that and health. But can I just say thank you to everyone, and hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hitesh.
Thank you very much.